Welcome to Cheap Irish Homes Social Media Chat, Episode 4. Of course, this week we met Aidan and Fiona, who are currently living in Dublin, looking to relocate to Cork, somewhere near a railway station, and of course, beautiful baby Leela. And the first house, of course, was the tailor's shop in Skibbereen. What I loved about that house when I first saw it was, sometimes I go into old houses and I see, down through the years, PVC has been added and things have been changed and some of the original character is lost. But not in this house. This was like a time capsule. It was the house or the tailor shop that time had forgotten. When you walked into the tailor shop at the front, you could see everything was almost untouched. It was as if someone had certainly just switched off the lights and really get a sense of what life in the tailor shop was like. In fact, just before we walked in, Maggie and I met a gentleman on the street. He told us all about the history of the tailor shop and all the different families that had lived through it. And in fact, one family had lived there for an awful long time, and their children had run the shops across the road and everything. So there was a real rich history to this house. We went upstairs and had a look at the bedrooms, which are beautiful, cosy little bedrooms with lovely sliding sash windows. And then, of course, we went up to the roof. It was only then we showed them the kitchen, which was probably a little bit small and probably too small for family life nowadays. I think Fiona was probably a little bit disappointed with the kitchen. At the back, and certainly you'd probably knock the old outhouse and the old lean-to roof that was out the back and make things and build on a proper extension. But you see, like when you build an extension onto an old house, you're going to spend an awful lot of money very quickly, and if the budget's a bit tight, it's a big expense and a big draw on your budget. So I think maybe Aidan and Fiona weren't overly keen on that aspect, although I think they loved the house in itself. Of course, the next house was the beautiful cottage in Ballydaly for 40,000. This was a lovely house. When you walked upstairs, when you saw it on the show, you could see there was some significant local damage to a ceiling, which looked really bad. It wasn't as bad actually as it turned out to be. There was a few slates missing on the roof, which could easily be fixed. I mean, and should have been fixed quite some time ago when they came off. The kitchen was a nice space, a good size, albeit it could have a little bit more light. The back door could have glazing added, which would bring a lot more southerly light, because of course southerly light is the very light you're looking for in your living space. So I always look for southerly light on the back of a house, or consequently northerly light on the front of the house. Again, Aidan spoke of maybe building an extension onto the back of the house, which is great, but I prefer to get the house renovated first and get it up into a reasonable living condition, and then see what's left in your budget and decide on extensions, because extensions, they just cost a lot of money, spending tens of thousands of euros very quickly, and you would have to argue, would that money be better spent on getting the house up to tip-top condition before you start looking at extensions. The next house, of course, was in the village of Ballyclaw. I suppose Aidan and Fiona are coming down from Dublin, where they're used to a bit more kind of cosmopolitan life, and they like the quiet life, but I suppose they like the quiet life in a quiet setting, which would be in the countryside, less so than in a town. Maybe they felt it might have been a bit claustrophobic if the town was quiet, and they were living in the middle of town, which is where the house is. Well, the house wasn't in terribly bad condition itself. I think someone had been doing kind of some strip out works. Like normally when a builder would be stripping out a house, you strip out the first floor first, and then you strip out all the ground floor, and then you might look at doing some work out the back. But whoever had been stripping out this house was kind of doing it the other way around. So they had nothing done on the first floor, they had nothing done on the ground floor, and they had a lot of stripping out done on the back. The house was getting progressively worse and more demolished as we walked through the ground floor. As we got to the back, you could see there was walls and bits of roof and everything else missing. So I don't think there was massive money in getting the house up to some level of running order. As Maggie was saying, even all the doors that had been taken off were actually still in place, so it could be put back on quite easily. It's just that there was a bit of work in getting all the back reinstated, or knocking down the rest of the unnecessary buildings. And I suppose the advantage it did have is it had a lovely outhouse at the back, which needed a little bit of work, but again, that wouldn't have to be done straight away. And that gave Aidan options for his jewellery making business. So I think there was a bit of a selling point there, and there was access to the rear as well. There was vehicular access, so look, that might have been a good selling point for them as well. And the final house, of course, was in Drina, and this was like 75k. This was a fine house. The roof was in reasonable condition generally, but there were local issues I felt around the chimney, and there was some kind of vegetation growing around the roof. One interesting fact was they had a concrete stairs there, which I thought was amazing, because like normally you'd have a timber stairs in a house, and the timber stairs could be made either on site with lengths of timber, or could be made in like a local joinery shop. But what they had was a concrete stairs. To build a concrete stairs is actually a very difficult task. And what you've got to do is you've got to create all the mould for the concrete, which is called shuttering, out of lengths of timber and plywood. And then you're pouring concrete into it. That's a lot of work compared to what it would take to do a timber stairs. And I've never seen a concrete stairs like that in a house that didn't have precast concrete first floor. And of course the beams holding up the first floor were a little bit undersized. Like normally you'd have a 9x2 over a reasonable span for your first floor, and they actually had a 4.5 inch by 2 inch. I mean, it had a shorter span, so you can get away with less, but you wouldn't use it today. So that ceiling would actually be much lower if you built it with today's standards. Now, we walked around upstairs, and the floor was very solid. So look, sometimes you're going to have to live with some little bit of to and fro in these old buildings. I didn't get the impression they loved the house. It might have been a little bit remote for them, but a nice house in its own right. So time to jump into Twitter and see what the comments on Twitter were like. The first one is from Jim X Comet. What's the story with all the unopened bottles of wine in these derelict houses? Well, Jim, I suppose, look, you've got to think about the people who last lived in these houses. I mean, these houses, some of them are fairly shook, and some of them are fairly remote. These houses would have been kind of lonely places to live in, perhaps, and the people who kind of met their end there, they might have been living alone, and maybe the bottle of wine was their only companion. The idea isn't bad, but if it had been filmed in, say, February, March 2019, and it ended with, since this was filmed, the couple decide to ... there was no closure. These shows were actually filmed early this year, so like February, March 2020, and of course they went on air in April, so there certainly wasn't a whole lot of time to follow up the participants. Of course, the other thing is with COVID-19 worldwide, which kind of broke out just as we were finished filming, auctioneers have been largely shut, and people are all staying indoors with the lockdown, so there isn't a whole lot people can do. Hopefully, if we get a second season, you never know what we might look at. This show just frustrates me. She is showing houses that need major structural work to people who don't have the budget to do these adjustments. Every week so far, it's kind of getting pointless now. Disappointing, as I love the idea behind the show. Look, I suppose you can look at this a variety of ways. Like some of these houses do need a lot of work, and some of these houses need remarkably little work. I mean, I would advocate that in this situation you should be buying a house that is big enough for your needs, so ideally you wouldn't have to extend it, and that's in as good a condition as you can possibly find it, because like you're getting the building work at very suppressed prices here, and some of these, like 30-40 grand, will go an awful long way. Cheap Irish Homes seems to justify nightmare property holes for 75k and upwards, and that engineer should audition for the role of property Pollyanna. Like, what I'm here to do is give my expert engineering and building knowledge for people who are considering spending an awful lot less than the average person on a doer-upper house, and are prepared to rough a little bit and pull and drag the whole the project to get a roof over their head. It's very easy for me to go in and just condemn these houses and say flatten them, or take it all down and spend 200 grand renovating. But I mean, that's not going to happen. These people aren't going to spend that kind of money, and these houses are going to be lost. So I'm here to give realistic advice, give some little bit of hope, but realism to these people, and rescue the houses. And the people who are involved in the show are generally people who are willing to roll up the sleeves. They mightn't do it all in one go. They might stage the renovation project. They might be prepared to live in one room while another room is being renovated. And and do it piecemeal and do some of the work themselves. And there's an awful lot of money that can be saved if you do the work yourselves. I mean, you could spend $3,000 on a kitchen if you buy it, second hand, or you could spend $30,000 on a kitchen if you buy it brand new, a high-end kitchen. So there's, there is a wide bandwidth of approaches that you could take here with these houses. I'm here to help these houses and these people in a way which I don't think they are being helped currently. Maggie bought her house for 80,000, and for I think like 40 or 50,000, she did an immense amount of work by rolling up her sleeves with some friends and family, pulling in a few favours, admittedly. It's not for everyone, but it's for someone. So I hope you enjoyed episode 4 of Cheap Irish Homes Social Media Chat. Tune in to episode 5 next week. We're going to have a very different format. I think it worked very well. So I hope you enjoyed. Let us know what you think. See you then.